الله أكبر الله.
So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to ask you to please hold all your questions to all the speakers who have spoken. We'll try to get to you toward the end of the session, inshallah. So we're going to go ahead and start. Our first speaker is Dr. Joshua Salaam. He's been a police officer, an imam, community activist. He managed CARE, Civil Rights Department, for 4 years. He's the current chaplain at Duke University. He holds a master's degree in religious studies and a doctorate degree in ministry. So that's Dr. Salaam. He's going to speak on blackness, and Islam, and legacy of fusing spirituality, fatwa, and pursuit of justice.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I begin by seeking protection with Allah from Shaitan, who is our sworn enemy. I begin with the name of Allah, whose mercy is infinite, His mercy is continuous. I want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to apologize for jumping in, but you see the company that I'm with, and so I have to respect my elders, and I stand here on the shoulders of Imam Siraj, Imam Khalid Griggs, and others, and there are way more informed people than I to speak on this topic. I'm really here as the current president of the Muslim Alliance in North America, and I'll get into that towards the end of the topic, and I'll show you a few pictures of people who, in our community, who are well-versed in this subject, and I encourage you to check their websites and read some of the books and other things that they have written. So let's go to our first slide. All right, let's do a quick exercise. I want you guys to, if you're comfortable, close your eyes and remember some of these stories, all right? So we have Prophet Isa, Jesus. You remember the stories about him and the miracles that he did. He would grab some mud and shape it into the form of a bird and blow into it and it became a real bird. Remember that story? And they have his mother, Maryam. And the Maryam, she was blessed to get food when it was just out of season. Nobody knew how she got it. She was eating and she said, this is from Allah. And when she got pregnant, she was by the tree and she was commanded to shake the tree. You know these stories. And then we have John, Yahya, one of the, I think, as they say in sports, one of the underrated prophets in the Quran. Such a pious person, and he was working with Jesus in his ministry. Then you have Musa, powerful figure. Musa, when he came down from the mountain and he had his commandments and he was upset with his brother that he allowed him to, for them to go back to worshiping a cow. You remember that story. Then you have Yusuf, Prophet Joseph. His brothers put him into the well. They left him for dead, and he went through an amazing journey and came out and was over all the finances of the land. And then Jacob, Yusuf's father, who had 12 sons, 12 tribes, Bani Israel. And he had went blind from his misery of losing his son. And then his father Ishaq, right? And then his father Ibrahim. You remember these stories. Ibrahim, the one who was counseling his father when he was a young boy about which person had killed the stones. And then Prophet Noah, over 900 years giving dawah to his people, quietly, publicly. And then Adam. Now, if your eyes are still closed, I want you to open up your eyes and look up there and tell me, how many black faces did you imagine? How many of those people in your mind were black? If you're like me, none of them were black. And that affected me, that when I open up a children's book about Adam and Eve, of course, a lot of Muslims won't put the actual picture, but the silhouettes and the bodies are really creamy. Not dark black. So let's go to the next slide. And this is back one more. So this is a Quranic verse, and I have about six, seven translations. 4 of them translated as black mud. Dark black mud. That is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam from. And so there's many scholars that say that they believe Adam was dark black. I'm just pausing there for a second because for some people it's disturbing. And there was one scholar that I was listening to that said something that really shook me as far as where does this racism come from? Where does this issue that is everywhere? This issue of blackness is everywhere. Even amongst black people, there's an issue with blackness. For sure amongst Arab people and Pakistani people and white people and any people in the world, there's an issue with people who are black and dark. And where does it come from? Allahu A'lam. But one of the ideas is, imagine how furious Iblis was when he was commanded to bow down to this creature. And he's still upset. He's still trying to prove that we are ungrateful creatures. He's still after humanity to try to get us into the hellfire. And is it possible that he just has an issue with blackness? Because he was commanded to bow down to a black man. Allah knows best, but I wanted to show you that these aren't my translations. These are famous translators of the Quran who just don't translate it as mud. 3 of them just said mud, but 4 of them said black mud. Next slide. So this statement here says, oh, Brother Joshua, you remind me of Balaa. Okay, all right. So click a button, see if it comes up. Just click a button, yeah. What does that mean? What do you mean I remind you of Balaa? Because I sing? He had a nice, beautiful voice? Okay. If that's what reminds you of Balaa, okay. Oh, because he was so in love with Rasulullah. That's what reminds you of Balaa, my love of Rasulullah. Because he was such a strong companion. He didn't waver. Is that what reminds you? Or is it just because I'm black? And is that the only image that you can think of in our history? Is that one? How come, click it a couple more times. One more time. How come I don't remind you of Adam? How come Imam Siraj doesn't remind you of Adam? This brother reminds me of Adam. That's a nice, smooth, black skin, mashallah. Because those images aren't in our mind. It is not what comes to our mind when we think of Adam. And don't let me get into Jesus. Even Christians don't even know what Jesus looked like, but it's kind of, you'll see somebody down the street and be like, oh, he look like Jesus. Why? Because he's white and his eyes are blue and he has long hair. Next slide. So you won't find it if you're not looking for it. So I was listening the other day to this very intelligent man, Brother Neil, some type of nuclear physicist or astrophysicist, and he said the most important, significant event in human history, he said, in human history was Christopher Columbus coming to America. Why? He said because it was the first time. And this is my brother Neil. I listen to a lot of his stuff. He's a very bright man. But he said it was the first time after the Ice Age when the water receded and the land bridge was shown and people started traveling from one continent to the next, and then the water came back up and people were stranded. He said that was the first time that the people were connected again, was with Christopher Columbus. And I said, that don't sound right. I mean, I've read some other studies that say something else. So let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about a timeline. And I can't really see it from here. But anyway, so before 1311, Allah knows best. But one of my favorite scholars, Abdullah Hakim Quick, talks about Mansa Musa and his brother before him, who was king, who turned over the leadership to Mansa Musa and then sailed with hundreds of ships across the Atlantic in 1311. And then there's other scholars who say when Christopher Columbus came here, by the way, with two sailors who were Muslim because they had already sailed the seas and they already knew where all this stuff was, they had found Muslims here and they found black people here and they found stuff here that was from Africa. But here is one of the most intelligent people in the world, Brother Neil, saying that it was the first time in human history. So there's a lot of stuff related to blackness and black people that is just kind of ignored, written off. I personally walked into a high school in Northern Virginia to give a talk, and I asked the gentleman, I said, it was a history class at a prestigious high school. And I was looking around at all these posters on the wall, and I said, what do you guys teach about the African presence here before Columbus? That's what I asked him. He said, well, you know, not much because they didn't really have a written language. I said, that's what he's teaching at a prestigious high school? That black people didn't have a written language? This is not too long ago. It's like 10 years ago. SubhanAllah, Timbuktu, one of the most amazing places. When I grew up, it was, the only thing we knew about Timbuktu is that's where you got knocked out to if somebody hit you. Knocked you out to Timbuktu. But we didn't know about its libraries and its rich educational history. We didn't know it, we weren't taught it. Next slide. So in that previous slide, I mentioned some other things about the development of Islam in America from, you know, the people who were coming here in the 1800s, a lot of Arabs, a lot of people from South Asia. In 1965, when the gates really opened up to a lot of the Muslim community, the first white man that they had documented who became Muslim in the late 1800s, Brother Webb, Alexander Webb, to the Nation of Islam. Before that, Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish Science Temple, and then after that, the Darul Islam movement, and then the biggest movement to mainstream Islam in the history of the world happened in this country under the leadership of Warithuddin Muhammad. And nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, there's a few people that have studied it. One brother I know has a PhD in it. But most of this Muslim community doesn't even know that. That is amazing that you right here in this country have some history for a Muslim in the world. We have something unique. Besides bean pie, we have the most people that came to Islam in overnight. So in this picture you have Brother Amir. He has a museum here in Washington, D.C. about African American Muslim history. He is very well informed. That is a person you should go to learn about the history of African Americans in Islam, in America, African Americans in America. And you can look I got his website up there. So you can check out his website. Please check out his website and learn some of the amazing things that you probably did not know about Muslims and black Muslims in America. So when you get questions like, when did you convert? Why don't you have a Muslim name? My name is Joshua. I've always been asked, why don't you have a Muslim name? I said, I do have a Muslim name. It's Joshua. Don't you know that Muhammad, Aisha, Abu Bakr, Bilal, Hamza, all of these names were given to them by pagan parents. What made those names Muslim? They did when they accepted the faith. And our tradition is, if you have a good name, you keep it. If you have a bad name, like Donkey or Ward, then you should change it. Huh? Wolf Dog, yeah. But my name is Joshua. Joshua means God saves. May Allah save us all from the hellfire. That's a good name. I keep it. I consider that my Muslim name. So it's really changing the mindset that we have as people to not make blacks and African Americans feel inherently that you are less than as you are. And that you have to change your name and change the way you dress to kind of be accepted. We have our rich history of Islam in our community. Some of the best Hufaz are from Africa. Best people who have memorized the Quran. Some of the Quran reciters in Africa let me see how much time we got, could not be called a Hafiz until they wrote their own Quran. You could memorize it, and then you had to write it. And you would carry it with you. And so when you learn, I think on one of the next slides, we have one of the famous people here who rewrote the Quran when they were here. That's because they had done it before, after they had gotten free from slavery. When you talk about who was the first judge, I remember when I was working at CARE, the immigrant community announced, oh, the first judge in America. And it was a new press release. And then the African American Muslim said, excuse me, we got sister, she was in Maryland. What was her name? Judge Mahasi. So y'all didn't know about her? Oh, we didn't know. Well, you're not going to find it unless you're looking for it. And you need to look for it because of this rich history of African American Muslims in America, even before Columbus. Next slide. Dr. Jamila Kareem. This person is very well informed. I encourage you to check out some of her books, not just because she's a Duke graduate, but because she's an amazing intellectual. And she wrote a book about, in the 60s, when the flood of immigration was coming to America from the Muslim world, they had a choice to kind of connect with the African American Muslims. It was a missed opportunity. I wish somebody had the wisdom of Rasulullah to kind of make us the Ansar and Muhajirin and kind of pair us up. But they moved into the suburbs because at that time it wasn't cool, it wasn't good to be associated with black people. It was better to be associated with whiteness. And you see the ramifications of that still today, that we're a very separated community. But we need to know our history and know how we got that way. Next slide. And so that leads to the organization that I'm with, Man, a Muslim Alliance in North America. These are some of the people that have been affiliated with us on the screen. And the final slide. The next slide is just beautiful, amazing black leaders in this country, not necessarily with MANA, but I wanted you to see their faces and I wanted you to see our vision and our mission statement. And the last part of our vision statement is really to keep this legacy alive, this legacy of Islam in America. And if we feel like if we can hold on to that legacy and not erase it, and not make it seem like Islam just got here in 1960, and we say, oh, the first masjid was built in 1927 in Cedar Rapids, Michigan. What? When you had Mansa Abu Bakr coming here in 1312, you think that was the first masjid here in the state? Maybe, but you're not going to find it unless you're looking for it. There's a city called Allah, Arizona. Anybody heard of Allah, Arizona? Yeah. I think Muslims don't want to live there because they probably consider it shirk living in Allah. But it's a city. There's Muhammad, Illinois. These cities are old cities here in the States. So we have to look for this history. And my last thing is that we hope that we can work with other people, other individuals, whether they're black or not. But our focus is the African American Muslim community. And why is that our focus? Just like before this, the people that were on the stage were talking about the racism, the strong Islamophobia happening in India. You're not going to move the needle on that unless you focus on that issue. This is an issue that we have. It's a worldwide issue, but we're trying to focus on the American impact of that, of what it means to be black and the issues that we have, the racism that we have still in this country. Most of the time you don't feel it until it's time to get married. But we do have it. And we have to address it so that we can see and continue to see the legacy live on and the African American Muslim community flourish. That's my time. I want to yield it to the sheikhs up here. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Salaam. Very beautiful. I know you have a lot of questions. Save your questions. We have to talk about things like this. White supremacy is worldwide. So we cannot ignore these issues. Some people are uncomfortable with stuff like that for some reason. Our next speaker, we have a dear friend of mine, Brother Mustafaa Carroll. Brother Mustafaa Carroll has been a human rights and civil rights activist since he was 14 years old, going back to the 60s. He's a former executive director of CARE in Dallas, DFW area, and the former executive director of CARE in the Houston metro area. Brother Mustafaa is going to talk about how far we've come, yet how far we have to go. Brother Mustafaa.
Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alamin, wa salatu wa salam ala ajma'in, wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu, wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
In case you're wondering, I thought it'd just be kind of cool for me to ride in on a scooter. Thought that would give me some style, but alhamdulillah, I'm so thankful for being here and thankful for all of you being here. Thank our brother, Dr. Salaam, that just gave such a wonderful intro to our program. And actually, some of the things that I'll be talking about will be about just a brief synopsis of the history of our history here in this country. We have several objectives that we want to accomplish during this. First, I'm going to provide you a historical synopsis on the presence of African American Muslims in the U.S. Secondly, present some of the major issues that confront the overall African American community. Third, give a brief overview of how the African American Muslim community has historically addressed issues of the people. And then lastly, what should the Muslim communities focus in addressing these issues of the common people under the banner of Islam? As our brother Dr. Joshua had talked about, Muslims have been in this hemisphere 180 years before Columbus with Mansa Musa Abu Bakr, who traveled from Senegambia to the Gulf of New Mexico. Another brother, Mustafaa al-Zamori, a Moroccan brother who actually, known by Estebanico, sailed throughout the Gulf of Mexico, up through Texas and California, etc., during the early 1500s. There's even been a piece that was put out by the Code of Mures in China that talked about Muslims sailing to the land of Mulan Pai. This is in the 11th century. And so you'll find that we had a long history of that. We also see that there were enslaved folks brought to the Western Hemisphere, to South and Central and North America in the early 1500s. And in 1619, we began to see more Muslims that were brought to this hemisphere. And of course, after they were brought, folks were trying to get away. And so then we start seeing slave catchers, which was the early form of American policing. And to this day, we still have some of that culture in our police departments, and this is one of the reasons why we have some of the issues, and that's why we have to understand the history that's in this country. Some of the more notable Muslims that had been enslaved, first of all, was Ayub ibn Suleiman Jaylan, better known as bin Solomon from Senegal. He's from a noted full-based family, first known Hafiz in this country. To the right of him, Bilal bin Ali Muhammad, first Muslim American scholar in 1802, fluent in Arabic and Ula, and also had a knowledge of high Islamic studies. And there has been some reports that he established the first mosque here on Sapelo Island, where he managed 500 to 1,000 of those persons who are enslaved. I haven't been able to find anything that would really qualify that, but that has been something that has been talked about in several circles. After that, we also some more notable Muslims, and I think our brother also talked about our Hajj Umar ibn Said. He studied for 25 or so years with scholars. In the middle there, you see Yarrow Malmount, one of the longest living, was the longest living American at 128 years in this country. And then if you've seen the movie or the documentary Prince Among Slaves, you see Abdullah Rahman ibn Sori, who was a West African Muslim enslaved on a Mississippi plantation. And in that video, that documentary, he actually does return to Africa and dies some short months later. So, what are some of the major issues confronting the overall Muslim American community? The same issues that have impacted all of the African American community. The first of them have been identity. And secondly, I would say resistance. Now, this information I got from Dr. Hassan Bagby, who is a former associate professor of Islamic studies at University of Kentucky. I don't hold that against him, even though I went to Indiana. So we have some issues going on here, but nevertheless, he did actually an excellent job in a piece talking about what were some of the major issues confronting the overall Muslim community. The same issues that confronted the African American community, but even to a point further. The first being the relationship to America. It's always been jaded, it's always been difficult, and we've always had to determine resistance or assimilation. In that, African American Muslims had adopted a strategy of dignity based on Islam. If you look at, and I'm doing a documentary right now that's talking about the roots of Islam in America, and if you look at why did so many African Americans come to the deen, particularly in the early years, especially during the 60s, it was in search of freedom, justice, and equality. And as we know, Islam on its face is about justice and equality, etc. And so that was one of the preeminent reasons. That's not the only reason, but that was something that many of us were looking at. Rejection of negative stereotypes about black folks, about being lazy, shiftless, etc. And I often tell people we didn't get lazy and shiftless until they had to pay us. Before that, we were brought here just for that purpose, because we weren't, because we worked hard and we had been known for working hard for many years. Rejection of imitating white culture. So we had those kinds of issues. And then rejection of assimilation. We didn't want to be assimilated into this culture. And so those were some of the struggles. Now, some of the positive or possible responses from assimilation was we'd be isolated, we'd convert, which meant we'd have to develop a separate community, and then we would either plan activism to change America, and that's where we are even to this day. The second challenge we had, and that was relationship to African Americans, that is our own ethnic identity. And so African American Muslims adopted a strategy of uplifting African American people, struggling against oppression and racism, and giving alternatives to popular black culture. It wasn't going to be church, and it wasn't going to be street. And some of the possible identities that we we acquired that Islam is black, that this was the first thing that we thought about. We thought about Muslims, we thought about Islam, we said, oh, that's a black religion. We rejected African American identity, and some of us wanted to be Muslim only. And so you would find brothers, sometimes, and sisters, but most of the time I was around the brothers, and you'd have a brother who grew up in the 3rd Ward of Houston or some other ghetto, and they would be speaking with a Pakistani accent. So we had some serious identity issues going on. You said, brother, what's up with you? You speaking like that, but you from the hood. What's going on? You chewing your mishwak and whatnot. Can't take a joke, I guess you shouldn't be in charge. So we decided, okay, whether we accept African American identity and Muslim identity, and we would be Muslim first and then African American second, as it should be. In relationship, the third challenge was relationship to Islam. Syncretic meaning that we mix it up with other stuff. Some people would call it bid'ah, or would we go mainstream, whatever that means for different folks. We learned traditional Islam or avoid it because there were certain underpinnings around learning traditional Islam. It doesn't mean I had to put on a jalabia or a thobe, that I have to wrap my head up, etc. It became problematic. If we did adopt mainstream, then which approach would we be traditional, conservative, moderate, or liberal? So, first, we want to provide a brief overview of how the African American community has historically addressed the issues of the people. And I can assure you that there's been a kaleidoscope of ways that we've addressed issues with the community. Some of the early conveyors of Islam to African Americans presented some of those challenges. Our brother also spoke about Noble Drew Ali, better known Timothy Drew, who was the first African American to call for a return to Islam. After that, we see in 1921, Dr. Muhammad Sadiq, who was from the Ahmadiyya community, was the first Ahmadiyya missionary to the U.S. And in 1925, Sadi Majid, who was a Sudanese Muslim who sought to establish a nationwide association focused on including U.S. African Americans into Sunni Islam organizations. In 1926, we have Dussi Muhammad Ali, who was a mentor of Marcus Garvey, who formed the Universal Negro Improvement Association, a part my grandfather was a member of in East Chicago, Indiana. And my mother tells the story that he had all 14 of his kids and my grandmother ready to go back to Africa when Gordon Garvey was elected. Now, I know that sounds like old stuff. I'm not that old, but my grandfather was. He was 101 when he passed. He was born in 1865, 10 months after the 13th Amendment, and he died in 1966, 2 years after the Civil Rights Act of 64, and a year after the Voting Rights Act of 65. But he was like 87 when I was born. So, we had some rich history that goes about this, but the approach that Dussi Muhammad Ali imparted with the Honorable Marcus Garvey was to go back to Africa, that there was no place for us. He was one of the first to talk about a return to Africa, and later that was followed up with other groups, specifically the Nation of Islam, who also had decided to separate, but not necessarily because of racism, but not necessarily because of their racism, but because they didn't see that we would ever get a fair shake in this country. So the response to doing that was separating. And this was brought by Fard Muhammad, who was the founder of the nation. And in that same year, African-American Muslims in Pittsburgh built the first masjid in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Allah